Seen a video slideshow on who was the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time. This is always an interesting debate subject for boxing fans. The heavyweight division captures a lot more interest, I think, than the other divisions, generally speaking, with the possible exception of the welterweights and middleweights. Welterweights dominate boxing these days because all the top, proportionally, they have a higher percentage of rated fighters than any other division, because they have Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Timothy Bradley. But nevertheless, there's always been an intrigue about the heavyweight division. I don't think actually the heavyweight division is in decline, as some claim. I think simply there are fewer Americans rated there than ever before. You have guys like Bryant Jennings, Chris Arreola, but generally the heavyweight division is dominated by East Europeans these days. So I do think there's a nationalistic bias on the part of American pundits and publications. I don't think the heavyweight division has declined at all. I mean, people accuse the Klitschko's of being boring and of dominating the division. Okay, maybe they have dominated the division, which can have a detrimental effect. But boring? Well, put it this way, Klitschko's fights regularly sell out 50,000 seats in Germany. Now, if there was a decline in the division, if there was no interest, you would not be getting 50,000 seats filled. I do believe that Klitschko is going to be seen much better in history than he is now. It's not that he's necessarily disregarded now, but he's certainly not getting the sort of acclaim he would get if he was an American champion. The fact he's Ukrainian, I do think it goes against him, unfortunately, because unfortunately, you know, in sports, America dominates, so it dominates in terms of, now it's not so much that they're not ranking him, they do have Klitschko at the top of their rankings, but he just doesn't get the sort of attention that he should get, in my opinion. Put it this way, if it was an American heavyweight champion, he would be on the cover of Ring every few months. The last time I saw Klitschko on the cover of Ring was 3 years ago, so why is that? Anyway, it made me think, well, who do I regard as the greatest heavyweights? It's not actually a very easy task to undertake. Now, with each result I give, I want to give a little explanation, and I'm not going to name like top 20 or something, I'm just going to go through maybe top 10. And this really isn't an easy task, it's a lot harder than it sounds, because all of this is subjective, and remember, a lot of these guys never fought each other, so it's impossible to know for sure. At the top, I will place Ali. He's the most famous boxer ever, but the thing about Ali is he wasn't just hype. Ali was unquestionably a great, great fighter. Yes, he had some losses, but the way he mastered the ring was incredible. The sort of elegance, which is a term rarely used in boxing, but I will use it in this context, the sort of way he danced around his opponents, the sort of speed he had for a heavyweight, and the sheer athleticism. Also, I don't think this should be underestimated, the fact that he brought a lot of attention to the sport. He was one of the sport's great popularizers. That in itself has to give him some points. Ali fought some of the greatest heavyweights of all time. The 70s was and is regarded by many as the golden age of heavyweight boxing, and he was the greatest heavyweight of that era. So with all that taken into account, I will put Ali at number 1. Number 2, and this is also a man who would have a fair claim to being in the number 1 spot, I put Joe Louis. The sheer length of time that he dominated the heavyweight division, the sheer hardness of his punch, the dominance that he had over opponents, the cultural impact that he had, which until Ali, he probably had a bigger cultural impact than any boxer. So, Joe Louis, number 2. Number 3, I put Rocky Marciano. Marciano did beat Louis, of course, but as Marciano himself said, Louis was a shadow of him for himself. Nevertheless, I do think Marciano was great in his own right. There is a tendency nowadays that history's starting to treat Marciano badly, and he's gradually going down the rankings, whereas traditionally he's been seen, especially by the Italian-American community, as a great, great heavyweight, well, for them as the greatest. His 49-0 streak is no trivial matter, and let's not forget the guys he beat were not average fighters. He beat some very good contenders like Roland Destarza, and he beat greats like Archie Moore, like Joe Louis, like Jersey Joe Walcott, So I put Marciano at number 3. Number 4, and this is where it gets more difficult. Number 4 for me is sort of I really do find this a tricky one, but for me, maybe Gene Tunney or Vladimir Klitschko, maybe joint number 4. Let me explain that. Tunney is possibly the most underrated heavyweight ever. He was a great fighter. He beat Jack Dempsey in the fight of the long count. Okay, there's controversy over that, but Tunney was a great fighter in his own right. So I put Tunney number 4 simply because I think he's hugely underrated and I think he deserves a much higher say. Klitschko has dominated the heavyweight division longer than any man apart from Joe Louis, so that in itself has to count for something. I still think that Klitschko is hugely underrated, and again, just because a lot of his opponents happen to be non-Americans does not mean that he isn't facing the top competition. In boxing, fighters have to face the biggest names of their day. The biggest names of his day, of this day, happen to be mostly fighters from Eastern Europe. Guys like Alexander Povetkin and Kubrat Pulev. Well, the Pulev fight hasn't happened yet, but I do think Klitschko is hugely underrated, and I think history will put Klitschko a lot higher. He's an incredible punching power. Again, he's well, I wouldn't say a popularizer of the sport, but certainly in Europe he is. So I do think Klitschko is hugely underrated. So joint 4th, I'm going to say Gene Tunney and Vladimir Klitschko. Number 5, and again this is difficult. Number 5, I would have it probably joint Larry Holmes, Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, George Foreman, maybe Joe Frazier as well. Those 5 guys, it would be hard for me to choose between them. Foreman's skills in the ring is phenomenal. His power, for one thing, although in boxing power is not everything. But for me, the phenomenon about George Foreman is the achievement he had in coming back after that defeat in Kinshasa, which would have humbled any normal man, coming back and managing to beat Michael Moorer after being dominated in that fight. Moorer was a very good contender, and for Foreman to do it at that age, in fact Foreman could well, I would be pushed as well to consider Foreman at the 4th position. But anyway, George Foreman. Lennox Lewis, I think, again, is a bit like the Klitschko's. He's hugely underrated stateside. Lewis dominated his game. He beat everyone in the sense that the only 2 losses he had, which I believe was against Oliver McCall and Hasim Rahman, he came back and avenged. He was the greatest British heavyweight ever. He was a very skilled and dominant fighter. One of the biggest heavyweights ever. So yeah, I do rank Lennox Lewis very high. Who else did I have in there? Joe Frazier. If it hadn't been for Foreman and Ali, Joe Frazier would have been the greatest heavyweight of the 70s, unquestionably. I sometimes think Joe Frazier might be slightly overrated, but nevertheless he's a great fighter, so I'd put Joe Frazier in that sort of bracket. Larry Holmes, again, he had the disadvantage of coming immediately after Ali, and he would be a lot higher ranked if Ali never existed. But Holmes was a very dominant fighter in his own right, so Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes, George Foreman, Lennox Lewis, and Joe Frazier probably joint. Afterwards, it's very difficult, but afterwards I'd probably put guys as follows, not in order, but these guys would all deserve a place probably in the top 12. Jack Dempsey, Jack Johnson, Mike Tyson, Billy Conn, another underrated fighter, maybe Sonny Liston. Those are guys who I think are greats, but not necessarily all-time greats. The reason I don't have Dempsey as high as some people might have him is because he refused to fight black men. Now, apart from being racist, that actually makes it difficult to say, for example, how he would have done against someone like Jack Johnson, although Johnson was slightly before his time. But that has to take some points away from Dempsey. Nevertheless, he was the biggest celebrity of the 20s. He was a cultural phenomenon. He was a very skilled fighter. Billy Conn, I think, is hugely underrated. I do think Billy Conn is one of the greatest heavyweights of his day. I mean, he was named Fighter of the Year, I think, twice. I might be wrong about that, but he was certainly named Fighter of the Year at least on one occasion. Mike Tyson, okay, this is something I've emphasised before, and it's always one of the most controversial. A lot of boxing fans nowadays act like Tyson was Superman. They often put him at number 2 after Ali, sometimes even number 1. There's a few issues I take with that. Firstly, I don't take anything away from the skill that Tyson had. Becoming world heavyweight champion at the age of 20 was a phenomenal achievement. Not to take anything away from Tyson, he deserves all the credit he gets for that achievement. It was outstanding. He fought some pretty good fighters, guys like Pinklon Thomas, Michael Spinks, Tony Tubbs, Tony Tucker. They were all good fighters, but they were not world class. He beat an aging Larry Holmes, but he got beat himself by a pretty average Buster Douglas. And that's not to take anything away from Douglas's achievement, but look at Douglas after that. He did not capitalise on that, so Douglas was not an outstanding fighter. But surely, if an average fighter beats a great fighter, when the great fighter is still in his prime, and this is the point, this was not years and years later, this was 1990, when Tyson was still a young man, still very powerful. Now, the problem I have is Tyson fans always make excuses for that. Oh, he was in a bad place at the time, he was messing around with prostitutes, he was on drugs, whatever. In a professional sporting contest, there are no excuses for that sort of thing. So, in the end of the day, Tyson lost. That's what happened. James Buster Douglas had plenty of adversity himself. He had a lot of members of his family were seriously ill. I believe his mother just died. His wife was seriously ill. He himself was battling a kidney ailment at the time. And he overcame all that adversity to beat the world heavyweight champion and one of the most feared men to ever enter a ring. So people should not take anything away from Buster Douglas for that achievement. I just don't think Tyson is all he is cracked up to be. Yes, he was a very skilled heavyweight, but even his KO rate is exaggerated. If you look at his early fights, it wasn't actually a case that every single one was stopped on a KO in the first or second round. A lot of them were. But I don't think he matches Deontay Wilder's record. I don't think he matches a lot of other guys' records. In fact, if you look at the Ring Magazine resources, he's not even in the top 20 in terms of KO streaks. So, all that being said, Tyson certainly deserves a place in the top 10 for his achievements, but I don't think he's quite as phenomenal as he's made out to be. Riddick Bowe, would he deserve a place in the top 15? I'm not sure about that. I don't know if he's... I think Riddick Bowe is above average, well above average as a champion, but not quite sure he stacks up to either Lennox Lewis or Mike Tyson, or Evander Holyfield. Well, what am I talking about? He beat Holyfield, but I don't know. I'm undecided on Riddick Bowe. I need to watch more of his fights. There's other guys that I would call good contenders, but they wouldn't be in the top 15 sort of bracket. That's guys who came, they made a brave effort, but they never quite got there. Guys like Tommy Morrison, guys like Michael Moorer, or maybe some of these guys were champions, but they never quite capitalised on it. So again, maybe you have Tommy Morrison, Michael Moorer. Shannon Briggs was pretty good in his day, but I don't rank him highly now. Vitaly Klitschko, for that matter. Michael Spinks, pretty highly ranked, I would say. Looking further back into history, Jess Willard, James Jeffries, maybe. Let me know your thoughts. Who do you think is the top 5, top 10 heavyweights of all time? And please give an explanation for your reasons. If you disagree with my choices, fair enough, but I would ask do it in a respectful way. These are just opinions. Do you agree with me that Klitschko deserves more recognition? Do you think he's boring? What do you think? Oh, I'm just remembering now, there's another heavyweight I think is hugely underrated. That's Sam Langford. Yeah, actually, Sam Langford might well deserve a spot in the top 5, so yeah, I forgot him. Sam Langford. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you.